never easy, feeling like you're so alone, and your heart feels like a stone. Think about it night and day, wondering if you'll be okay. I'm here in this place once again, suffocating. It's drowning me too deep. I know I've gotta stop this, so yeah, don't you worry. Take your time, take it slowly. No, don't give in so easily. Yeah, you deserve to be free, yeah. Stop this thinking, take a breath, stop your doubting. No, don't you see, toxicity and worrying has no meaning. I don't wanna be this way. Navigating through the clutter in my mind, I do this all the time. Think about all you've done, it's a journey. Just know that you deserve it. Look ahead and keep on walking, walking towards the light. Oh yeah, stop this thinking, take a breath, stop your doubting. No, don't you see, toxicity and worrying has no meaning. I don't wanna be this way. Help me find the happy side of me, of me. Help me find the stronger part of me, of me. Turn around, give yourself the permission. Just know that you deserve it. But sometimes I get scared and dismissive. Don't wanna be this way. Don't wanna be this way, yeah. Don't you worry. Take your time, take it slowly. No, don't give in so easily. Yeah, you deserve to be free, yeah. Stop this thinking, take a breath, stop your doubting. No, don't you see, toxicity and worrying has no meaning. I don't wanna be this way. It's never easy, feeling like you're so alone, and your heart feels like a stone. Think about it night and day, wondering if you'll be okay. I'm here in this place once again, suffocating. It's drowning me too deep. I know I've gotta stop this, so yeah, don't you worry. Take your time, take it slowly. No, don't give in so easily. Yeah, you deserve to be free, yeah. Stop this thinking, take a breath, stop your doubting. No, don't you see, toxicity and worrying has no meaning. I don't wanna be.
Hi, a very good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Trauma-Informed Care Talk for Parents and Caregivers by Campus PSY, in collaboration with the Youth Alliance and Beyond the Label. My name is Ming Siu, and I'm the founder and executive director of Campus PSY. Together with me, we have Yok Wen, the lead trainer for today on Trauma-Informed Care.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Although it's a Friday evening, thank God it's Friday. Okay, can we have the slides, please? Right, thank you so much. Right, so as we mentioned earlier, today's topic is on trauma-informed care for parents and caregivers. Yeah. Right, so for the next hour, we're going to go through with you two segments. For section 1, we'll be discussing on what is trauma, right? Understanding trauma. The second component is on trauma-informed care approaches. Right, so before we start today's session, we'll just have a brief run through of what we do as an organization for Campus PSY, and then later on I'll pass the time over to Yok Wen for today's content. Yep. Right, so as you can see from the screen, right, that the photo there taken is actually during our launch in 2017. Those in orange are actually our ambassadors, the Campus PSY ambassadors. They are youths from the Institutes of Higher Learning and also young working professionals who are trained with basic mental literacy and peer helping skills, so that when they go back to their schools and the workplace, they will be able to support their peers who are in distress. Right, over the years, we've been working with different partners. Like, for example, the National Council of Social Service, NCSS, AIC, Agency for Integrated Care, IMH, Institute of Mental Health, HPB, and also different partners in the mental health space like CHAT, the Community Health Assessment Team, SOS, Samaritans of Singapore, and Singapore Association for Mental Health. Right, so who are we? Right, so Campus PSY Singapore is a registered non-profit organization. We aim to promote mental health awareness and peer support amongst youths in the schools and young adults in the workplace through advocacy, training, support, volunteering, and intervention to create an inclusive and supportive community for youths with mental health conditions. Our vision is to rally and empower like-minded youths within the campus and beyond, alongside young working adults who are passionate about impacting the mental health community from the ground up to ignite positive change in the youth mental health space. No worries. Yeah, sorry, okay. Yeah, so just now I was talking about the 5 main key pillars and services that we provide at Campus PSY, right? So the first one is advocacy. So we do quite a bit of mental health awareness events to help raise mental health awareness among Singaporeans and young people. And this is one of it, right? In collaboration with Beyond the Label. So we do quite a lot of youth mental health dialogues with young people, parents, caregivers, educators, helping professionals, and also events like, for example, the escape room, the e-escape room that we actually collaborated with Beyond the Label, right? So we constantly find innovative ways to reach out to young people to learn more about mental health related literacy. Second is training. So every year we train about 50 to 100 young people with basic mental literacy and peer helping skills, so that when they go back to their schools and the workplace, they can support their peers who are in distress. And that brings us to our third key pillar, which is support, right? So at Campus PSY, we provide both online and offline peer support services, right, on our social media channels, like, for example, Facebook, Instagram, IG, TikTok, and also through email services. So, if you know of someone or a young person who's struggling with mental condition and needs some basic emotional support, do reach out to us through these different channels, and we will actually match our Campus PSY ambassadors and peer supporters to provide basic emotional support for our young people. Fourth one is volunteering. So we have been serving our different mental health beneficiaries in our partner organizations like IMH, SAMH, so on and so forth. And last but not least, the newest key pillar and service. So next year we'll be going into intervention. We would have a team of allied health professionals to provide outreach services and basic emotional support and counseling services for young people in different regions in Singapore. Right, so without further ado, let me just hand the time over to Yok, and she will be the lead trainer for today.
Thank you, Ming Siu. Do we also want to let the participants know that this is a recorded session? And yeah, feel free to turn on or turn off your video whenever you feel comfortable to do so. Right? Anything else you want to add?
Thanks, Yok. You did well.
Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Yok Wen, and phew, we've come to the end of the week. This week there's been many changes, and wow, we're just all here, and thank you. Thank you for showing up here with us on a Friday at 9 p.m., learning about trauma-informed care for caregivers and parents. And I would like to start off the session with an offer of a grounding practice. Yeah, this grounding practice is to support all of us, because I'm sure throughout the whole week you've been working very, very hard. And that, like I said, this has been a week of a lot of changes. So I would like to offer this grounding practice to help all of us come back into this present moment, and then we will enter into the session proper. So if you have kids, feel free to ask your kids to join you for this practice as well. And if you'd like to join me, begin by finding a comfortable sitting shape. So you might be sitting on a chair, you might be sitting on the ground, you might be sitting on the sofa, wherever is comfortable for you. We're going to begin with 3 tension release breaths. So we're going to take an inhale through our nose and then let out the biggest sigh that you want. Exhale through the mouth. So you're all at home and we're here in the studio. So take this practice, however, and in whichever way is going to be useful for you. Okay, so for those of you who like to join me whenever you are ready, taking an inhale through your nose, maybe slowing down your inhale as you do that. And then letting out with a sigh. Just letting go everything from Monday to Friday, all that you've been carrying for the whole week. 2 more times if you want to, as you inhale in through your nose. And then let it out with a sigh. And one last time, if you find that it's useful, you're welcome to also raise your hands as you inhale through your nose. And as you exhale out through your mouth. All right, then the second exercise that we're going to try, if you'd like to join me with your kids, we're going to hold out both our hands stretched out in front of us. And at the count of 3, we're going to squeeze our hands into a fist as tight as we can. In 3, 2, 1, just squeezing really, really hard, like you're squeezing a lemon. And you might feel different sensations in your fingers, in your palms, and tops of your hands. And staying there for another 3, maybe for 2, and the last one, and then just release. And as you release your hands down, again, you might notice some sensations, tingling sensations, or maybe some flowing of your blood, that sensation of the pulsation inside your hands. And releasing them and maybe shaking it out, shake out your hands a little bit. We're moving into the next part of the grounding exercise. Okay, now gradually, if stretching is helpful for you, you're welcome to maybe find some side stretches, maybe raising one hand up and leaning over to the other side. Maybe bringing both your hands up, interlace your fingers and stretch your hands upwards. Maybe staying for a few seconds, and you're welcome to come out of it whenever you want to. And then gradually, taking your time, whenever you are ready, slowly easing back to your chair, easing back to your sofa, easing back down to the ground. Perhaps noticing your inhales and your exhale. Maybe slowing down your breath a little bit. Breathing in through your nose and breathing out through your nose. And whenever you are ready, you're welcome to reconnect with the Zoom screen and with us in this session this evening. Thank you so much to those of you who joined us. Again, my name is Yokwen, and we're here with Campus PSY today, sharing with you trauma and trauma-informed care. The reason why I wanted to begin this session with an offering of a grounding practice is having done social work in the area of child abuse, family violence, and neglect for the past 9 over years. I've learned that taking care of ourselves is so important when it comes to doing the work of trauma-informed care. Because trauma-informed care is one that takes up a lot of our energy. And when we talk about energy, it's not just like mental energy, it's not just our time, but it's also a lot of our emotional energy, a lot of our psychological energy, and sometimes even physical energy. And so we want to remember that self-care is a really important component of trauma-informed care. When our cups are not filled, we won't be able to offer that space and that spaciousness for our children whom we are taking care of day in and day out 24/7, to help them move through some of the challenges that they have experienced in their lives that may have been traumatic for them. We also want to share that while this program is designed to help us understand trauma in children and youth, completing this session itself does not qualify us to conduct any form of therapy or counseling. So first part of the session today, we're going to have a little bit of an understanding of what trauma is, and today's session is really quite an introductory one. And then second part of the session, we will then dive into understanding a little bit more what is trauma-informed care. And some of you in this Zoom room right now may already be familiar with what trauma is. And for those of you who are familiar with this topic, I'd like to invite you to take this 1 hour to maybe do a little bit of a reflection. Because day in and out, we're always moving from one task to another. And we don't really have that downtime to really sit down and reflect on some of the challenges that we have had supporting our children who may be experiencing trauma. And for those of you who are very new to this, maybe you haven't even heard of this word trauma before, what I'm about to share with you might sometimes be too much or sometimes be too overwhelming. So I'd like to invite you to really digest and take in this information at your own pace. Yeah, and we'll just have a really casual session tonight. Already, we've been through a week of changes and work. We don't want to stress ourselves out in this next 1 hour additionally. Okay, so let's start our first conversation. Yeah, when we talk about trauma, what do you think trauma is? So in recent times, recent few years, recent few months, this word trauma and also trauma-informed care has been really coming into the forefront of many conversations, both in the news, in social media, in new media, as well as conversations in our social groups. So we are quite curious, Ming Xiu and I are quite curious, what do you think trauma is? So we'd love for you to put it in the chat box right now if you like to. What comes to your mind? So you can drop in one word, you can drop in a phrase, you can drop in a sentence. Maybe something that you have heard of in the news recently. Maybe it's somebody you know. Somebody told you about a story about themselves or their families or their children. Or even it might be some of your own personal experiences, but we like to caution and also invite you to only share what you are comfortable and you feel safe to share in this public space.
Thanks so much, Yok. Yeah. So feel free to actually share your thoughts on what comes to your mind when you think of trauma in our Zoom chat so that it actually helps to facilitate our discussion later.
Yeah, we love to know what you think. And Ming Xiu, do we have any responses so far?
Oh, we have one from Boon Yu, Stanley. Bad experience.
Bad experience,
Right.
yes.
And then we have one from Wenna. It means tragedy.
Tragedy, yeah.
And Jia Yi mentioned Jia Yi, emotional response to a scary event.
Very nice.
Dawn says feel unsafe.
Yes, that is such an important word to remember. Safety and the lack of safety when it comes to trauma.
Right. Thank you so much, everyone. Shui says a situation that feels overwhelming.
Yeah, so we're hearing words like situations. We are hearing things like scary and also distressing and overwhelming.
And we have one from Paul. Paul says unresolved emotional events.
Very nice. So we also keep hearing this word emotional or emotions coming up for us, right?
Right.
Okay. Anything else? Feel free to drop it in. I also forgot to mention just now, throughout the next 60 minutes, whenever you have a question, just drop it right into the chat box. Ming Xiu will help me keep a lookout for it, and we will answer and carve out time for Q&A towards the end of this session. Okay, so tonight I'd like to offer you two perspectives of trauma, and these are not the only perspectives of trauma. There are many more, but this two really helps us to begin a conversation with ourselves or with our loved ones, ways to think about what trauma is. So just now we hear things like events that are scary, events that are overwhelming, distressing, emotions that's very hard to cope with. So one perspective that we can use to look at trauma is that trauma results from an event, a series of events, or set of circumstances. And I would also throw in there relationships. So relationships that are experienced by individuals. So it's not so much about the event or the circumstance or the relationship that the trauma is rooted in or was birthed from, but it's more about the experience by this individual. And this experience is one that is very harmful or even life-threatening. And when we talk about harmful, it doesn't only just mean physical. It can be emotionally harmful. It can be psychologically harmful as well. And because of this very harmful experience, there are lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning. And this functioning can be mental functioning, can be physical functioning, social functioning, emotional, or even spiritual functioning. So that's one perspective to look at trauma. And the other one that can be helpful for us to understand is trauma really is anything that overwhelms our ability to cope. So if in a nutshell, it would be anything that is too much, too fast, too sudden, or even too little. So I'll explore that a little bit more in a bit. So these are two perspectives that we can begin to center our thinking around or center our curiosity around what trauma might be. Okay, so these 3 E's of trauma could be something that may be helpful for you to remember what trauma is: event, experience, and effect. Okay, so first one, events. So like I mentioned just now, events or circumstances where the trauma was rooted in. So the trauma was really birthed out of that situation, that event, or that relationship, and not so much a defect in the individual. I think there might be a common narratives that people might hold about trauma, which is that something must be wrong with me. That's why I'm always feeling all these negative emotions. I'm always feeling this overwhelming sensation. Something is wrong with me. What is wrong with me? Or something must be broken in me. But we want to kind of begin to shift that kind of mindset from what's wrong with you or what's wrong with me to what happened to you, or what is it that happened to this child that led to this child behaving in a certain way or experiencing certain big emotions that he or she or they cannot cope with anymore. Okay, so first in trauma-informed care, we want to shift the mindset from what's wrong with you, what's wrong with me, to what happened to you or what happened to me. And when we talk about events, circumstances, and relationships, trauma can stem from a lot of situations in our lives. And these 8 that we're going to share a little bit more with you tonight are just examples. It's not exhaustive. So when we talk about trauma, a lot of us might think about abuse and neglect. And there are many types of abuse. There's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, emotional and psychological abuse as well. And then when we talk about neglect, we might think about situations like the children not having enough food to eat, the children having no shelter or no proper supervision from the parents or the caregivers. But I want to highlight that as children, we have fundamental needs. And this need to yearn for love, this need to yearn for affection, and this need to yearn for connection with our caregivers and our parents. And when our parents dismiss us, when our parents ignore us and what we say, when our parents say things like, "Aya, you stupid lah, you won't understand one, go away, don't come and disturb me." This kind of little sentences that we say that we might think very little of can actually be traumatic for young children. Because to us, they are just little sentences that we're just saying it in passing. But to them, it means the world to them. We need to remember that all our sentences and things that we speak to our children and things that we also communicate non-verbally, so even with our hand gestures, whether we want to look at them or not, sometimes we just avoid them or we turn away from them. This can all be little micro roots of trauma that over time can build up if we are not careful about it or if we are not aware about it as caregivers and as parents. So I just want to highlight that neglect can have and can manifest in so many different forms. It's really not just food and shelter. Of course, that is one of them. So these 2 are key sources of trauma. When we talk about abuse, even though today, this session is for parents and caregivers, I want to highlight that abuse can happen at the workplace. Abuse can happen between married couples or couples in relationships. Abuse can happen in the school settings. Abuse can also happen between seniors and juniors. Yeah, so whenever there is a power difference between one party and the other, and the party with more power abuses that power or takes away that safety and the trust, then that's when trauma may occur or may begin to form. So other examples, separation from loved ones. Right now we are seeing more and more married couples getting divorced. So divorce is a common source of trauma for children if they are not supported to process, to understand, and to move through this experience. Death of a loved one is another one, especially for very young children who might not understand the concept of death yet. And then bullying definitely is a source of trauma, and bullying can happen in school. Bullying can also happen at the workplace. Effects of poverty. I want to highlight that right now we have just entered into October 2021, which also means that we've been living with COVID-19 for about 1.5 years now. And COVID-19 really amplified many effects of poverty. And it also exposes other sources of trauma, such as unemployment, such as sudden changes in the family structure, such as hunger, the lack of access to healthcare, as well as other impacts that is happening in a family, like homelessness and difficulties and structural barriers like that. Then we also have unpredictable parental behavior. So when we're talking about unpredictable parental behavior, we're talking about the inconsistency in the way parents are sending messages to children. So on 1 minute, this parent can be very loving, giving all the attention to the child. The next moment, the parent becomes very dismissive, very absent, perhaps even using language that is rude or mean to the child, as if the child doesn't matter to him or her. So this switching between the behaviors can be very confusing for children, and that in itself, even though it might not be a clear-cut case of abuse, that inconsistency in the parenting and also in the messages that we give our children can potentially become a source of trauma for them as well. Next, we have witnessing acts of violence. So recently in our community, we have also witnessed and we have also heard of news of some of these examples happening right here in Singapore as well. Lastly, source of trauma definitely coming from natural disasters, from wars, and from accidents as well. Okay, so just now I mentioned about how experience is really a key factor to whether this is going to be traumatic or trauma is going to take root in our bodies and in our minds. So we want to think about when this trauma happened. The younger the child experienced the traumatic situation or events in their lives, the deeper the impact. Okay, where this trauma took place, how did it happen, who was involved, how frequent did this traumatic experience happen. So two persons, for example, Ming Siu and myself, we can go through the same event, but he might come out fine and okay, and I might be severely traumatized by the situation. So the difference, how come he can come out okay and I come out traumatized? It really depends on the protective factors and the protective figures and the supportive figures we have in our lives. If we have someone or a group of people to help us process, to help us move through, and to help us integrate that traumatic experience in our lives, in our present day, then the likelihood of this child or even the student being able to cope and to continue living without severely impacted by the trauma triggers will definitely lessen a lot. And that is why it's important to practice trauma-informed care, because we don't have to be a therapist in order to be therapeutic. We can all be therapeutic presence to each other. And I know you might be familiar with this saying, it takes a village to raise a child. And so even if this child has gone through a lot of traumatic events, relationships, and circumstances in his or hers or their life, it doesn't mean that definitely they will get trauma, and trauma is not a death sentence. Okay, so lastly, effects can be short or long term, and effects of trauma may or may not always come up immediately. Sometimes they may only appear after weeks, after months, or even after years. And the reason is because at the point when we experience the trauma, it might be so overwhelming for our bodies to cope that our body and our mind immediately and automatically suppresses it and hides it, really as an attempt to protect us. Again, this is not a mechanism to destroy us or to damage us, but to protect us, because the reality out there is so abnormal and so horrifying that it is really hard for our bodies to deal with and to work with. Okay, so sometimes the effects will only come out years later. And definitely trauma can interfere with developmental tasks for young children, even for teens as well, and affects our ability to engage in our relationships. Okay, so now we'd like to invite you to maybe just take some moments looking at these 4 main categories of signs of trauma responses. I'd like to invite you to take a moment to think about or reflect back. Have you ever noticed your child exhibiting some of these responses? Or perhaps for yourself, experiencing these reactions as well. So how do we know when it's a trauma response? Because all of us have headaches. You know, when we get stressed up or we are rushing a deadline, we get stomach aches as well. But when these reactions are persistent and sometimes we get stuck in it, then that's when we want to be careful. So if you notice that your child persistently exhibit some of these emotional or physical reactions or cognitive reactions, we want to be curious about what might really be driving this reaction, and sometimes it could be a traumatic experience. So we would like to invite you to put in the chat box if you ever notice someone you love, someone you care, exhibiting any of this reaction. And we're going to see what comes up in the chat box.
Sure, thanks so much, Yok. So feel free to actually put in some of the trauma responses that if you have actually observed from your child or someone whom you know, a young person who might be struggling with trauma-related issues. Right, so I think here we actually have a question from Felix, whether the slides will be shared with you guys. Yeah, so Felix, just to answer your question, the video, right, the video recording for today's session itself will be up on the Beyond the Label Facebook page and YouTube page, together with the slides, after today's session. So hope that answers your question. Shui has a question here for Yok. Is chronic fatigue trauma related?
It can possibly be. So again, there's these 4 categories that we have up here, signs of trauma responses. They are not exhaustive as well. So if you chronically, persistently feeling extremely tired and you just want to sleep, but maybe when you actually get to sleep, you find it very hard to fall asleep. But during the day, you find that you have no energy at all. You're just really trying to get by. It can possibly be a trauma response that is really coming from either a flight or a freeze response. We'll talk a little bit more about the fight, flight, freeze later on. Okay, just wondering if anyone would like to plonk into the chat group, what are some reactions that you have ever noticed, either in a child or even in yourself?
Right. So thanks, guys, so much for your questions and your responses. Feel free to actually put on your responses in the Zoom chat itself. What are some of the emotional responses or even physical reactions of cognitive reactions and behavioral reactions that you have observed from your child or someone who's struggling with a condition? Oh, the responses are coming in. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Yeah, fast and furious. Okay, we have one from Mahua. How do we overcome trauma?
Wow, that's a very big question. Mahua, I will speak a little bit more to that the second part of the session.
Right. Okay, so Mahua, just hold it there for your question. Nisa, she mentioned about night terrors.
Yes, night terrors, nightmares, especially persistent ones, can possibly be a sign of trauma response, or at least something is really bothering this child, that they are not having the support to work through what is bothering them or what is worrying them. Thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing about excessive lying, because I was going to bring your attention to one of the responses, which is protective denial. So we may have a child who is constantly lying to a point where no matter what question you ask, immediately and instinctively this child gives you an answer, and you already know this is not the truth that he or she or they might be telling. So instead of seeing the child as a liar, or even thinking that, oh, lying is in this child's personality, this is how the child is like, he or she or they just love to lie because they don't want to tell the truth, right? And we might start putting judgment on this child. We want to shift that mindset again to thinking about what has happened to this child in his or her or their earlier lives that is leading to them to have to lie all the time. This lying is a protective mechanism. It is protecting them from something that is or was very overwhelming for them in the past. Okay?
Oh, thanks for that, Yok. That was really insightful. We have one from Lionel Finlix. He's saying becoming closed off, hiding in his emotions, basically avoidance.
Yes. And also sudden changes in behavior. Thank you, Shi Hui. So we want to, when we work with children or when we have young children, because they have difficulty communicating, and some of them, or rather many children, may not have that vocabulary or the language to tell us about the big emotions that they are feeling. So what we see instead are changes in a lot of their physical behaviors or social behaviors. So there might be a child who used to be very joyful, talking and laughing, suddenly becoming very quiet, suddenly wanting to withdraw from everyone else. That is quite a clear sign that even if it's not trauma, something is really bothering this child. Yeah, indifference, lack of empathy, we see that a lot in teenagers as well.
Right. Thanks, Nicole, for that. Emily also mentioned, yes, avoidance too, refuse to socialize with his other classmates. And we have one from Galatius. Is it possible to get immunized from trauma?
Yeah, I wish that we have a COVID-19 similar jab to like a vaccine to prevent us from trauma, but trauma is a fact of life. And again, I want to stress that trauma is not anything bad with us or in us. Trauma is a very natural human response that our body engages in to protect us from the harsh, painful experiences in our lives. And this trauma stays on if we didn't have the opportunity or we didn't get the support to work through, to process, to move through. This trauma forgets that the event has passed. You know, trauma happens when we forget that this painful experiences is already over. This relationship that brought us a lot of hurt and betrayal of trust and lack of safety is over. Our body and our mind continues to behave and respond as if we are still living in that dangerous time in our lives. So I want to highlight that trauma is a protective mechanism, and even though it is a fact of life, it is not a death sentence. Yeah. Maybe we move on to the slides. Thank you all so much for sharing your responses. Okay, so some of you have mentioned just now the night terrors. Nightmares definitely are other signs of trauma responses. Sensitivity to noise or even being touched. This thing about always expecting something bad to happen comes from the fact that when a child repeatedly gets exposed to events or relationships that are harmful for them, that are unsafe for them, that are threatening for them, then their mind and body is going to always be on the lookout that something bad will happen. Something bad will happen in this next relationship in my life. Something bad is going to happen in this next life stage that I'm going to go through. Feeling emotionally numb is on the other end of the spectrum, where we just switch off completely and we disengage from the world. There, of course, there's also excessive emotions such as anxiety, anger, shame, or sadness. At the core of trauma, oftentimes we find fear and shame. So things can get so unsafe that the child may no longer feel safe in their mind, no longer feel safe in their bodies, and perhaps even feeling unsafe with themselves. So what's happening in our body is in our brain. In a normal, healthy child development, our thinking brain works in sync with our emotional brain to help us be able to assess problems in our lives, to problem solve, to experience stresses, but also be able to move through the emotions that comes with the stresses. However, when trauma happens or when trauma is birthed over time, what happens to the brain is that the thinking brain shuts down. That is why children begin to have very poor concentration. They begin to do very bad academically, or not even being able to focus on what you're saying. Because the thinking brain shuts down, and what happens instead is the emotional brain takes over the thinking brain. And what we have is a survival brain. So this brain of survival mode, like I said, fear is a core emotion in trauma. So this child is constantly just thinking about how to survive. And that is why we see a lot of behaviors coming up, like aggression, anger, lying, and even just disengaging from everyone else. So this is part of the fight, flight, freeze response, which is really a physiological part of our body. Our fight, flight, freeze response traces all the way back to mammals and even reptilians. So it has been there in our bodies since the beginning of time. And whenever we notice a threat in our environment, we will immediately engage into this fight, flight, and freeze. In normal circumstances, once we're able to regain safety, this fight, flight, and freeze will fade away and we return back to a state of calm. We return back to a state of groundedness and also a state of regulation. But for children who experience trauma, and especially, remember the frequency, especially if they experience repeated trauma incidences or relationships, then the fight, flight, and freeze systems are constantly on. It's always turned on and on and on. And so any little thing in their environment, they will see as a threat, and they will react to protect themselves. And when they react, we may see them as defiant, we may see them as avoidant, we may even see them as unmotivated. This child very lazy. Give him or her or them so much help and they don't even want to help themselves. So how am I going to help them? But underlying all these impressions that we have of our children, there could be unseen truths. So again, you just want to reiterate the shift in our mindset from what's wrong with you, okay, to what happened to you. And some of our children, they're really struggling to regain even a sense of control and safety. And they just want to withdraw in order to protect themselves. Or they're struggling with giving in to those in power because maybe in their past experiences, those in power had betrayed their trust, betrayed their sense of safety, or maybe even taken away their sense of control. The hallmark of trauma is disempowerment and also helplessness and also a loss of sense of control. So these are all unseen truths that may lie beneath the impressions that we may have of our children. Okay, so very quickly, just want to highlight to you again what are some of the common fight, flight, and freeze responses in our children. You can see maybe a child who has severe meltdowns, kicking and crying and screaming, pushing people away. You know, this gesture of wanting to fight what is coming at him or her or them. Then flight would be a response where you just want to escape. So these children may be hiding from you. Their eyes are constantly switching from side to side. They don't really want to have eye contact with you. They may be very, very restless. There are, I think, emerging studies looking at ADHD and the diagnosis of ADHD and how it's actually linked to trauma. And then lastly, there's freeze responses as well. So when a child is in the freeze mode, sometimes you can see the child eyes blanking out. So there's this glazing over. They're not even looking at you. And when you look at them, you get this sense that they are not even here. It's as if their body is not even there. Some of them get very, very stiff. They space out and also holding of breath. Okay. All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit to sharing a little bit more about the prevalence of trauma in Singapore. And I'd like to begin with sharing this adverse childhood experiences, which is a study that started in the US in the 1990s. So it is the largest investigation into childhood trauma thus far. And over the past 2 decades or so, the researchers have already found a lot of relationship between early stressful childhood experiences with current mental health and health conditions in adults. So when they look at the adverse childhood experiences, other than the abuse that I've talked about earlier on, they have also looked at the impact of divorce, witnessing our mothers or our caregivers being treated violently, mental illnesses, living with a parent with mental health issues, substance use, and incarceration. All of these are potential sources of trauma that they found in their study. And if you look at this very simple table here and the chart, you can see that there's been an increase. In fact, there's been triple in physical abuse in Singapore over the past 10 years. And there's definitely also a rise in sexual abuse and neglect. Okay, and I also want to share that right now in 2021, our families who are experiencing abuse really are facing a lot of complex issues in their lives. So we're talking about structural barriers such as poverty, such as homelessness, such as living with mental health, both for the parents as well as the children, incarceration of a family member, as well as the use of substances and alcohol. So, and also having foreign parents, so transnational marriages, all of these are complicating and complex structures and systems that our families have to navigate while, they have to experience abuse, trauma, violence, and neglect in the family as well. Okay, so what the original study has found is that the greater or the more number of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that a child was exposed to in their childhood, the higher the risk for negative health outcomes. So this can be an adoption of risky behaviors as a way to cope, as a way to self-soothe. Again, when we see things like eating disorders, smoking, substance abuse, sexual promiscuity, we think about, this person is destroying his or her life. Why are they doing this to themselves? Why are they hurting themselves? But we forget that these are actually ways that they use to cope with the pain that was so overwhelming. And that is the trauma that they have been carrying in their bodies. Other than the risky behaviors, the researchers also found a strong relationship between childhood trauma and severe medical conditions, such as heart disease, cancer, liver disease, and for women, a lot of women-related illnesses and conditions as well. So if you'd like to know more about the relationship between trauma and medical health condition, I would recommend the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, and specifically his book called When the Body Says No. So Ming-Siu will put that into the chat box. Feel free to check that book out to understand more about this relationship. Okay, so locally, what we have done is last year, a group of researchers had actually replicated this ACEs study in Singapore. It's called the Singapore Mental Health Study. And they sampled about 6,000 people distributed equally across all age groups. And same thing, they asked the question, as a child, did you ever experience any of these adverse childhood experiences? And then right now, in your current adult life, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, what are some of the medical conditions you might be facing, or what are some of the mental health conditions you're facing? So what they found is that about 2 in 3 people have reported experiencing some form of trauma in their past. And when there's 1 or more ACEs reported, there's been a link found with major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and so on, or even suicide attempts. And when they found that these persons or when the participants report 2 or more ACEs, then there's a strong link to all mental health disorders, such as these ones listed below. Okay, so what does this tell us? It really speaks to volume that beneath a lot of mental health and health challenges that we see in Singapore today, so not just mental health, but even health challenges like diabetes, cancer, and heart disease, a lot of it actually lies, hidden beneath lies traumatic events that we have experienced in our lives. Okay, so a very, very quick reflection. We may not have a lot of time to do this. We'd like to invite you at this moment just thinking about what might be some possible reasons for victims of trauma being very hesitant to seek help.
Yep, so thanks everyone. So feel free to actually put in your comments in the Zoom chat on what are some of the barriers to help seeking for trauma survivors. Yeah, and I see Shi Hui actually put in a very useful movie called The Wisdom of Trauma by Dr. Gabor Mate. And also the Beyond the Label team has kindly put the book, When the Body Says No, in the Zoom chat itself.
Thank you so much. We'll let you take a moment to reflect on why you think possible reasons victims of trauma or survivors of trauma are hesitant to seek help. In the meantime, we'll return to the slides first and we'll offer some of the possibilities. So, fear of rejection, okay, family or social stigma, again, fear for safety, survival's guilt. So remember I mentioned about how fear and shame are core emotions from trauma. So there are many reasons why, or many barriers, internal barriers that survivors of trauma have to overcome before they courageously step forward to say, hey, could you, I'm having a lot of difficulties and I need support and help. Sometimes they may have experienced negative responses when they do share or when they do review, when they are not believed, when they are not trusted. That actually is a form of re-traumatization. So these are all possible reasons why they are not seeking help actively. Also, they may normalize, they may think that this is just who I am, I'm broken, I'm not worthy of love, I'm not worthy of support, I don't deserve any help, or I'm fine on my own, I can deal with this all by myself. All of these are part of the fight, flight, and freeze responses. So when we work with our children who might be going through something very big in their lives, we want to be mindful as well about these core feelings of shame and fear that they might be holding. Okay, so with that, then we move into then what is trauma-informed practice and trauma-informed care. So what is trauma? Trauma is a state where we find lack of safety in our relationships, lack of safety in our bodies, lack of safety in our our minds, lack of safety in our lives. So trauma-informed care then is really a framework to restore that sense of safety. So it's not just physical safety, but also emotional and psychological safety. And restoring this safety for both the survivors as well as the providers. And I also mentioned how trauma is about disempowerment and the losing of that sense of control. So what we want to do in trauma-informed care is to restore that sense of control as well as empowerment for the survivors. Why do we want to even practice that? I mentioned very earlier on, it takes a village to raise a child, and we don't have to be therapists in order to be therapeutic. All of us has this potential to offer therapeutic presences for the children in our lives. And trauma-informed care definitely helps to support healing and recovery. It lowers the stress levels, both for the children as well as for ourselves as people who are holding spaces for them. Also, having a shared understanding of trauma helps us to break the silence against abuse and violence in our community as well. Connection fosters healing. So trauma-informed care believes that healing happens in relationships, and healing actually happens in the here and the now. Every moment that we bring back the sense of safety in the relationship, every moment that we foster a connection, we reach out to a child and try to connect with this child, we are actually working towards healing. Whenever we are dwelling in the past or getting very worried about the future, whenever we are not in the present, then that's where trauma lives. When we come back to the present moment, when we are connecting with each other in the present moment, that's when healing begins. So 4 R's of trauma-informed care, we want to realize the widespread impact of trauma. And I would dare say that most of us, if not all of us, carry some form of trauma one way or another, to a small extent, moderate extent, or large extent at some point in our lives. And some of us may still be holding trauma in our bodies at this moment. But again, having trauma is not a death sentence. So we want to recognize signs and symptoms of trauma and to respond in a way that is going to be therapeutic for each other, to support each other's healing. And the last thing we want to do is to re-traumatize somebody. So there are many core principles of trauma-informed care. I just have one last minute before I end. So I just want to very quickly bring us through a few key points when it comes to working with children. Okay, first of all, restoring safety. And when we talk about safety, it's more than just physical safety, it's also emotional safety. So even choosing an appropriate time to have a conversation with your child is really important. And we want to be careful and alert to the way that we're communicating to them, not just with our words, but also with our facial expressions, with our non-verbal gestures. To a child, we are everything, and especially if you are the parent or the caregiver, you are everything to your child. So every little changes on your facial expression makes a whole world of difference. Whether you're communicating one of non-judgment, that you're still here, that you still love them, that you still care for them, no matter what they're about to reveal to you, is so important. Yeah, if we have that face of anger, of frowning, of disapproval, or of rejection and dismissal, or even dismissing, not taking their words seriously, that can also impact on the emotional safety of our children. So being alert to any stress response from our child when we are talking to them about something that is bothering them. So reflect back to the 3 fight, flight, and freeze responses that we talked about earlier. Next one is transparency and trustworthiness. Checking in with how our children feel before, during, and after our conversation with them. So I think one way we can begin this practice is actually learning about emotions. And some of us adults, we may not even be familiar with our own range of feelings and emotions. And that could be one one place to start. When we guide our children to learn about their emotions, being able to recognize, being able to identify what feelings or emotions they are experiencing, we are then able to be transparent with them about, okay, when you are feeling this emotion, what might be happening, or what is it that is bothering you? What is it that is worrying you that leads you to having this feeling? Where does this feeling come from? Is there something that you lost, that you missed, that brings on these feelings of sadness? Is there something that happened with your sibling that got you really angry because you felt that, in that moment in time, there was a disruption to the connection between you and your sibling? So having a consistent relationship and routine with your child, where you are constantly checking in with your child on how they are doing, how they are feeling, reflects to them your commitment to the importance of their words, the importance of how they are feeling, and the importance of their experiences. So in other words, you are also communicating to them that their voice matters. Okay, so that feelings, teaching them about feelings, and the feelings wheel is a good way to start that practice, is really encouraging our children to communicate their needs to us. Remember, our children, as they may not have the language and they may not have the vocabulary. So as adults, we can guide them to begin to communicate what is bothering them and what do they need. So helping them find words, sometimes drawing and pictures can be helpful as well for those who are really, really young. So what we want to do is really set up this space to allow them to feel like they can express themselves without getting judged. Okay, so other than that, whenever there are changes or big transitions in their lives, for example, the start of a new term, start of primary school, there's a new figure in the household, whether it's the grandparents moving in, a relative or a helper, preparing our child or our children in advance. Just giving them heads up, asking them how would they feel about this change, what do they think about it, what might be bothering them, and how we can work through it together. So giving our child the attention, the comfort, and also the encouragement that they would like as they go through these difficult transitions, even transitions like big changes like deaths, like separations or divorces. We definitely want to prepare our child, our children, and help them understand what is going on, as well as hearing their voice and their opinions about how are they experiencing this transition in their lives. Okay. So helping our children feel seen and heard is one important trauma-informed care practice. Sometimes when their emotions get too big, what we want to do is to step back, perhaps stop talking, and simply listen. Listening and getting very curious about what might be driving this emotion, what might be driving this very challenging behavior that they're exhibiting right now. Because behind all challenging behaviors are unmet needs. So really listening and looking for what's the meaning behind this emotion. First of all, recognizing these emotions, and you might want to name this emotion and then reflect back to them, is this how you are feeling? I'm sensing or I'm seeing that you might be really angry. Tell me about what's happening for you. Or if you don't want to talk, I'm happy to sit here with you quietly, or we can do something together. So figure out what is an activity that your child enjoys doing with you during peacetime, and then during the explosive periods, offer this invitation to do this activity with them, and then also naming and reflecting some of these emotions for them, so as to help them to begin to also understand what is happening within their own bodies. Because for young children, they may not even know what is happening within their bodies and their minds when they experience these big emotions. Also, definitely some of the other things that we can do to help our children feel felt. Getting down to their eye level, giving them that direct eye contact, giving them a loving touch, offering your presence full presence. So I'm not talking about sitting there with them while scrolling through your phone, but giving them your undivided full presence and attention. Giving an empathetic look and also nodding of your head tells them that you are really here with them, and they also feel validated. Okay, even when you don't like the behavior, acknowledge their feelings and embrace their feelings. So what I'm suggesting here is not to stop all disciplining, but separating and decoupling the behaviors from the feelings behind the behaviors. Of course, you can still definitely put in the consequences and the disciplinary measures, but at the same time acknowledging their feelings and embracing that as well. And letting them know that it's okay that they feel that way and that there is no positive or negative emotions. All emotions are valid. Okay, if you know that there's something bothering your child and you're worried that that might be a traumatic experience that they have gone through, before engaging in a conversation with them, also preparing yourself mentally what they might disclose to you, because anything that they share with you is going to be really, really big for them. Again, they will be so sensitive to your reaction. The slightest hint that you communicate where you're not able to take this disclosure, you are shocked by this disclosure, you don't believe this disclosure, you find it hard to believe that such a thing can happen to them, that may communicate to them that you don't trust them, and that might possibly be another form of re-traumatization, and they might decide, oh dear, I think I said the wrong thing, my mom or my dad is angry with me, I should have just shut up and not say anything, and they may begin to withdraw, and it may take them a very long time before they decide to even share it with another person. So your reactions may trigger a youth or a child who is already overwhelmed. Some children are even uncomfortable being looked at directly for too long. So you also need to be attuned to the non-verbal gestures that both you and your child are sending to each other. Okay, when your child is upset, we can also experience very big emotions as adults. So what can we do, first of all, to calm ourselves down and to find our own sense of safety before we come in to assure them and to hold spaces for them? So some of you might want to even just take a moment to walk away, drink some water, cool down first, ensure that there's another safe adult near your child, especially if your child is very young. Just making sure that someone else might be there to support you, to be with your child while you step away. When you're ready to come back, speaking in a lower tone, acknowledging your child's feeling, being very honest with them, and being very assuring. So assuring that what they are feeling is okay, is valid, and even if I don't like your behavior, I am here with you. Take your time to feel what you are feeling. So it really takes a lot for us adults to also prepare ourselves to be able to hold that space, especially when eruptions appear. Okay, we're coming towards the end of the session before we enter into some Q&A. If you have any questions, what does it take to be trauma-informed? I think for me personally, this journey of learning to be trauma-informed really invited me to look at my own relationship with trauma. And I learned how practicing compassion and self-awareness for myself, so compassion for myself, self-awareness, being authentic to myself, are really first steps to being more trauma-informed with other people. When we are able to shift that mindset, shifting away from what's wrong with me to what happened to me, and then offering that kindness and compassion to myself as I move through some of the overwhelming emotions and sensations that I have, that's when I learned to be able to offer that presence to children, to youths, and to adults around me as well. So we don't have too much time to be able to dive deeper into this, but if you are interested, we are holding regular talks and workshops where we definitely dive much deeper into all the principles of trauma-informed care and what it takes. As an ending this evening, thank you so much for bearing with me for the past 1 hour and 10 minutes. I'd like to leave you with a question, because healing and recovery from trauma doesn't just involve this one-to-one interaction and practice where we try to be trauma-informed in our interactions with children. But it's got to do with our larger systems and what our society can do in terms of setting up the spaces and the structures to enable healing to happen. So even first of all, what support do you think you would need as a parent or a caregiver to be able to offer that trauma-informed presence for your children in your lives? What kind of support would you need? Like I said, if we are not able to fill up our own cups, it's very difficult to be able to practice this trauma-informed care, because trauma-informed care takes up a lot of energy. I can't emphasize that enough. It takes up time. It takes emotional energy, it takes psychological energy, it takes up physical energy as well. Okay, so with that, thank you so much. I will just leave you with some helplines and resources. If you are suspecting or worrying about abuse or neglect in children around you, definitely call in to Child Protective Services or the specialist centers in the community. You can also reach out to the community health assessment teams, as well as Tinkle Friend helplines, Clinical Intervention Center by Boys Town, as well as reaching out to the GPs or the psychiatrists and psychologists in KKH, in Child Guidance Clinic, as well as the family service centers near you if you are worried about your child. Okay, and this is the workshop that we're conducting regularly. We have one in October as well. If you find this talk helpful for yourself this evening, feel free to share it with your friends. And you're welcome to join us for the 4-hour workshop at the end of this month as well. Okay, I'm going to pass the time back to Ming Xiu, but we'd love to hear your feedback. Whenever you like to, feel free to scan this QR code and let us know what was helpful for you in this sharing this evening and what else we can do differently to support participants who may be coming in for future sessions. Thank you so much. I'm Yok Wen once again.
Wow, thank you so much, Yok, for the insightful and authentic sharing. And thank you so much, all of you who are spending the Friday evening with us. You know, it has been 1 hour and 15 minutes. And thanks so much for staying with us. We see some questions in the Zoom chat from you guys. So please feel free to actually put in your questions, because now it's actually the Q&A segment, right? We will take in some of your questions now while you're doing the feedback on the QR code, right? Right, so we have a question here by Emily. How to tell if our child is just being sensitive or traumatized? Yok, would you want to take this?
That is not an easy question, right? Because sensitivity is one of the signs of trauma. In fact, if you look into the work of highly sensitive persons, you would find that there is some research talking about even, say, experiencing trauma before they are born. So what I'm going to steer into intergenerational trauma now, and I think that is another whole conversation to be had. So trauma doesn't just happen in this lifetime when we are alive or after we are born, but we can inherit trauma from our ancestors, from our parents, our grandparents. There are already research done showing how trauma can be imprinted in our DNA and it can be passed down from generation to generation. So it is not easy to tell whether our child is a highly sensitive child or whether our child is traumatized. Again, what I would suggest is looking at your child's baseline behaviors. So that is always the place that we can begin. Understanding usually, you know, is our child already a sensitive child to begin with since young? Or has it only been in the recent times that your child or our children are becoming more and more sensitive, and that sensitivity spreads or generalizes to all aspects of their lives? Again, when we look at persistence and also getting stuck in that reaction, then that's when likely it could be from trauma. So I want to highlight again, we are not therapists and counselors out here, and we are not certified to diagnose children. And I don't think the aim is to diagnose our children with trauma, just with our own observations. I think the care here that we want to offer to our children is if we notice that they are really stuck in feeling that strong emotion or that physical reaction or that cognitive loop or disturbances, then that's when we might want to have a conversation with them to ask them what is bothering them, what is worrying them, and if you feel that you are not equipped to be asking these questions without communicating to them that you are disapproving or that you don't believe them, then I would suggest seeking out professional help as well. Yeah, that's when the professionals can come in to support both of you. So Pam has a question leading to that. What if my child doesn't want to see a counselor? I think one starting point could be offering to be present in that counseling session with your children. So it is very scary for children to be talking to any adults. There is a power difference between adults and children. As much as we like to think that, it's safe with me. I'm offering a safe space here. You can talk to me about anything. But the truth is, children get scared talking to us as adults. And for many children who are not used to talking to strange adults, they may think that they have gotten into trouble. And so maybe the child is not willing to see a counselor because they thought, oh dear, what did I do wrong this time? I must have done something wrong. My mommy is upset with me, and that's why she's sending me to this lady or this uncle that I don't want to see. So one suggestion could be offering to be present for the first few sessions perhaps, and also communicating with your child that they are not in any trouble and that you are worried for them, and you're going to be with them to see someone who might be able to help them. And this person is a person whom they can share their worries to.
Thanks so much for that, Yoke. Yeah, so with regards to Pam's question, right, I just want to build on what Yoke has mentioned. Apart from actually journeying with your child or the young person who is struggling with trauma or mental health condition, what you could also offer is actually time and space for that young person or child to actually process his or her thoughts. Yeah, because many a times, when our child or when a young person is actually struggling with trauma or going through mental health conditions or issues, they might need some time alone to actually process some of their thoughts and their emotions. So what you can do probably as a parent or even a professional, right, is that probably you can let them know and assure them that when they feel like talking, right, they can just drop you a WhatsApp, or Telegram, or even a call, and this is just to assure them that there's someone out there who really cares for them, and that they can depend on someone, and I think that brings a lot of hope for the child.
Definitely. Thank you, Ming Xiu. So time and space is so important. Even us as adults, when we go through something difficult, sometimes we just want some space to process what is happening to us and to try to make sense of it. So while we're giving our children time and space, just be mindful about their physical safety. If you are beginning to worry about the potential that they may begin to hurt themselves, that they have intentions to harm themselves, then that's when we definitely want to bring in professionals to also support our children.
Right, thanks, Yoke. Yeah, so when we talk about seeking professional help, right, so these mental health professionals are your counselors, right, so you have your social workers who does case work, and then you also have your psychiatrist who actually dispenses medication, psychiatric medication, and psychologists. If let's say your child or the young person needs to go through therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, narrative therapy, so on and so forth. Yep.
Okay, Shihui has a question. How do I mediate a situation between two children who are very upset with each other and they're crying loudly, they're shouting at each other? Very commonly, we even see them hitting each other and punching each other or slapping each other or pulling each other. So again, trauma-informed care, the number one thing we think about is safety. So first of all, physical safety, and I would suggest possibly just separating the two children apart away from each other, maybe bringing them to separate spaces. If it's available, having two adults to be with each child and two adults to use their own calm and grounded presence to help these two children to cool down first, before maybe bringing back the two children together to talk about what just happened between them, or what were they upset with each other about. So doing some of that resolution later on. So first we want to ensure that there is physical and emotional safety.
Right, thanks Yuk for that. And for those parents or caregivers or even educators and professionals who feel that your young person or your child doesn't want to go and seek professional help, at Campus PSY we do provide peer support service by Use for You. So just now we mentioned our Campus PSY ambassadors are actually trained in basic mental literacy and peer helping skills. So they will be able to actually support these young people who reach out to us through our Campus PSY Facebook page, Instagram page, TikTok page, or even through our emails.
Yeah, and thank you. Beyond the Label has just also dropped in some of the social service agencies. So if you have been talking to your child and your child is refusing to see a counselor, I would encourage you to call in to these agencies anyway and let them know your struggle. Let them know that you're having a challenge. You're having this challenge where your child don't even want to come forward to see the counselor. So the counselor and the social worker in the agency will be able to guide you through how to support your child and how to bring them forward to the center, or in the meantime, what you can do to support them.
Right. Yeah, just like what Yoke has mentioned, these social service agencies like Silver Ribbon, Touch Community Services, Club Hue, or Caregivers Alliance, they do provide counseling services from professional counselors and also caseworkers. Yeah, so if you need such professional service, feel free to go there. We have two more questions, right, before we end today's session. We have one question from Nicole. Nicole says that, Nicole was asking, youths have been using the term trauma very loosely with the influence of social media. How do we then differentiate whether they really need help?
Okay, like I said, right now in this current day and age, and especially with some of the news that have appeared or surfaced recently, the word trauma is very commonplace and is heard everywhere in conversations, in social groups, in social media, and in the news. And the youth may or may not have a holistic or comprehensive understanding of the word trauma. So they may be picking it up based on what they have read through social media or the news, but the fact that they're using that term may signal to us that definitely there's something bothering them. Again, I want to emphasize that we are not trying to diagnose them with trauma, but the fact that they're using the word trauma, and depending on what they say after using the word trauma, gives us the sign, gives us a hint as to what might be bothering them. So I think the first step forward is just thinking about, okay, what might they be worrying, or what might they be bothered about, and how can I support this youth about this issue that they are worried about and bothered about. And in your time, as you try to find out a little bit more, what they might be worried about or what is bothering them, then you may begin to uncover, okay, this might be a peer issue, this might be academic stress, or maybe this might be something more traumatic. And then from there, you'll be able to differentiate what kind of help they need. So I would say one way or another, the youth would need support, but it's really understanding what kind of support can we offer them by talking to them. So only by talking to them and engaging them and interacting with them, do we or would we know what they are understanding the word trauma, and why are they using this word in their language and in their conversations or in maybe their social media posts.
Right, thanks so much, Jok. We have just one last question by Wayne. Do you have the link for the peers-based workshop to sign up? And our Beyond the Label team at the studio has already put in, our sign-up link for our upcoming October Campus PSY's trauma-informed care talks and workshops. So Wayne, you could just click on that link. Later, we will also show you the slide with the QR code to sign up. Yep. And also, if you want to find out more on different resources, you can also go to the Bell Beyond the Label Help Board. Right. So can we have the slides, please, before we end today's session? Yep, so for more inquiries or potential collaborations, you could actually reach us at our Campus PSY movement at gmail.com email, our Facebook page, our Instagram, or even our TikTok page. Right, so I guess that's our last slide. Yeah, so I just want to give a shout out before we end today to the Beyond the Label team. Yeah, so we have 2 slides prepared. Right, so yeah, the Beyond the Label team has actually prepared the hashtag Stop the Stigma social activation campaign. Right, so what you can do, right, as a public member of public is to create a piece of content to express your support or acceptance for people or persons in recovery through a personal story, a piece of writing, picture, video, or any creative medium. After which, you can actually share it on your social media accounts, your Facebook page, your Instagram page, or even your TikTok page with hashtag Stop the Stigma. Then you can actually tag 3 friends to do the same to keep the momentum and movement going. They also came up with a mental songwriting competition. And this is not just a competition, but a way to build a supportive and loving community for individuals passionate about music and open to sharing your mental story or journey to someone whom you have supported. All works will be judged by industry music hitmakers like, for example, Martin Tang and Zach Zhang. Great prizes await you, right? So sign up now. Entries open 26 September to 26 October 2021. You can also register your interest at the link there, or you can just scan the QR code. So with that, right, we would just like to thank you guys for staying with us on a Friday night for 1.5 hours.
Yeah, thank you so much for staying with us, and we urge you to take some time after exiting from this Zoom room, just reconnecting with yourself, with your body, maybe doing something that you enjoy to wind down for the evening, because there's been a lot of information shared and it can get heavy for some of us as well. So we wish you a pleasant rest of the evening as well as an easeful beginning of the weekend ahead.
Right. So this is Ming Siu.
And this is Yok Wen. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much. We're from Campus PSY, and we'll see you in our upcoming talks and workshops.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm here in this place once again, suffocating. It's drowning me too deep. I know I've gotta stop this, oh yeah. Don't you worry. Take your time, take it slowly. No, don't give in so easily. Yeah, you deserve to be free, yeah. Stop this thinking, take a breath, stop your doubting. No, don't you see toxicity and worrying has no meaning. I don't wanna be this way. Navigating through the clutter in my mind, I do this all the time. Think about all you've done, it's a journey. Just know that you deserve it. Look ahead and keep on walking. I'm walking towards the light, oh yeah. Stop this thinking, take a breath, stop your doubting. No, don't you see toxicity and worrying has no meaning. I don't wanna be this way. Help me find the happy side of me, of me. Help me find the stronger part of me, of me. Turn around, give yourself the permission. Just know that you deserve it. But sometimes I get scared and dismissive. Don't wanna be this way. Don't wanna be this way, yeah. Don't you worry. Take your time, take it slowly. No, don't give in so easily. Yeah, you deserve to be free, yeah. Stop this thinking. Take a breath, stop your doubting. No, don't you see toxicity and worrying has no meaning. I don't wanna be It's never easy feeling like you're so alone.